right. So today we're going to talk about professional sales. And the reason I have an entire class, or two actually, dedicated to professional sales is that we are largely a professional sales department. So lots of marketing departments specialize in an area. So OU, for example, specializes as a transportation and logistics school. That's their main focus. They have obviously a general marketing degree, but their primary focus is for those people that are interested, particularly their graduate program in transportation and sales. We have decided, transportation and logistics. We have decided that we are largely a sales program. And so I think that it's really important, and I try to add shameless pitches to our program to get people to major in professional sales. I think it's probably one of the wisest decisions you could make. We have more jobs than I have sales students to fill those jobs. So I work with a lot of our companies that sponsor our program and have a relationship with us. And I've got far more jobs. They've got far more jobs than I have sales students. We have actually reached the point where our sales program, I think, is slightly larger than our general marketing program. And so I think it's one of those that it's a good profession to go into. There are lots of jobs. There's lots of opportunity to make money. 80% of our professional sales majors make over 6 figures in their first year. And by second and third year, they're making well over that. We have one student that's an example that they always use when the advanced class comes and talks, who's a recent graduate at 5 years. She had moved into sales management and was making over $250,000 a year. So it's a good program. There's lots of opportunities for jobs. There's a wide variety of industries that you can go into. And we have a wide variety of industries that we work with that require salespeople. And so I think it's something that you all should seriously consider. So everybody sells something. Even if you don't go into professional sales, fundamentally, you're going to sell your skills to an employer to work, right? Most of us, we're not born independently wealthy and we have to have a job. And so we're going to sell something. We're going to sell our knowledge. We're going to sell our skill set to an employer. And sales skills are transferable to a lot of other contexts. So politicians persuade voters and bureaucrats and other politicians to go along with what they want. When Congress passes law, and then it's signed by the president and it's made into law, usually that's a broad outline, right? So Congress doesn't say things like, for example, that you can only have 75 parts per million of arsenic in drinking water in order for it to be considered potable, right? They pass broad legislation that says we should promote, health and public safety, and good and clean drinking water is part of that. And they leave it to agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency to come up with the expertise, right? Well, when they do that, they engage in rulemaking. Those rules are oftentimes controversial, and so Congress people will try and persuade the bureaucracy maybe to not pass such a strict or rigid rule, right? So they try and persuade the bureaucrats, other politicians and voters to accept their policy goals. Friends obviously try to influence each other. You try to get people to do what you want to do. If you want to go bowling and they want to go to the movies, you're going to have to compromise if you want to spend time with each other. And so we try to influence each other, and that's fundamentally selling. And family relationships obviously involve a lot of persuasion. You all as children probably worked very diligently to persuade your parents to let you do things, right? As you progress through life, to let you go with your friends out to do X, Y, and Z, to spend the night, to have friends over for dinner, things like that. So that's all fundamentally sales skills that we can develop. So salespeople are enormously valuable in our highly technologically advanced post-industrial society. Again, if we go back to that early lecture, and somebody asked me if the fourth exam will be comprehensive, and it's not comprehensive in the way that I will ask questions from the 3 previous exams on that exam, but all of this is cumulative, right? Marketing is the only fully integrated function of the firm. It's cumulative, so everything that we've talked about before, it builds, and we get to more and more advanced topics. And so if we think about going back to those early lectures when I talked about the history of marketing, during most of our human history, if you built something and it was better than what was before, people would buy it, right? And it isn't until we get to the Industrial Revolution, really, that mass production of goods becomes available, and at that point, you really need to have people to sell, right? And so sales people are highly valuable in introducing new and innovative products to achieve adoption. So particularly in the business-to-business context, you're going to have to convince people that they should, try something new. When we first got into distance learning here at UCL, when I was an undergraduate, and then when I first started teaching, we didn't have online classes. The way you did distance learning was called correspondence, and it was much more limited. So you get a syllabus from the correspondence. We had a correspondence department here, and they offered various courses like American National Government via correspondence. And basically what the instructor did is they put together a syllabus with the textbook and maybe some ancillary materials that they developed, like their lecture notes. And they would either mail that to you, or you could come pick it up from the correspondence office, and that was how distance learning was done. Excuse me, I'm a little allergic today. So when online learning came about, they had the various providers like D2L, or at that point in time, I think we started out with Angel, that we should adopt their platform for learning management system so that we could, go into distance learning, not through correspondence, but by an online environment. So that required presenting, on the parts of the LMS providers, benefits and features that, would make it easier for students to learn in a distance way. And in the early days of online classes, it really was pretty much just like a correspondence course that was technologically more sophisticated. There wasn't a whole lot out there. We didn't have YouTube at that point in time. And so, it was just pretty much you put a syllabus out there, and maybe some lecture notes, and you'd have the students read, and then they would come in and take tests on campus. Now we've gone to a fully functional asynchronous environment where we can put up things like video. Next week, since we're not coming back anymore, we're not having more live classes, I will put up a video, for example, on social styles, which is part of the sales curriculum that I think will really help and be beneficial to all of you in figuring out maybe why it is that you're talking past other people that you interact with, and figuring out what their social style is. So salespeople are also the company's eyes and ears. I told you that marketing is the only fully integrated function of the firm. And by that, I mean that marketing has to work with all departments across the firm to ensure that we create value for customers. And sales is a big portion of our contact with the external environment. So all of the other functions of the firm, accounting, finance, operations, all deal with people inside the firm, right? Marketing and sales deals with people outside the firm. And so salespeople are often the eyes and ears with an external environment. I have a friend who was a salesperson for 3M, and she sold light cure products. And it used to be that orthodontists, when I got braces, and I asked this question in my first class, and I was surprised. I only had 3 students show up today. I think most people have decided to take an early vacation. I only had 3 students show up out of 20 something that are enrolled in that class. But I asked them, I said, how many of you had braces when you were a kid? And no one in the class had, of the 3 that I had braces. So I'll ask you, how many of you had braces? You had braces. You didn't have braces?
No, I'm gonna get them this summer.
You're gonna get them this summer. Okay, one of my students said I had Invisalign, right? So this is even more advanced than braces. So when I was a kid, I got braces, I think when my teeth came in, when I was, all of my adult teeth had come in, by the time I was in, I think, 6th grade, 5th or 6th grade, and I got braces in the 7th grade. And the way they did that was they pried open your mouth with this, horrific device, this torture device, and they would have to dry the teeth off and prep them, make sure that they cleaned your teeth and they had to prep them. And it took about 2.5 to 3 hours to do an entire set of braces because they would have to prep the tooth, then they would put adhesive on the bracket, and then they would have to hold the bracket there for an extraordinarily long period of time. Ms. Gillespie said I had braces for 4 years. That was my experience. I was a horrible patient. I had braces for a long period of time as well. So they would have to hold it on there, and it took a long time. 3M comes out with 3M is known for making adhesives. They come out with a new product that's light cure. So they could put the bracket on and instantly cure it to the tooth, which saves about, 50 to 60% of the time in putting braces on teeth. So you have to have these things open your mouth for far less. It was not torture or not as torturous. And it also meant that orthodontists and dentists could put in more braces. If you're an orthodontist and you've got somebody that's taking 2.5 to 3 hours, how many sets of braces can you get through in an 8-hour day? Like 2 or 3, right? All of a sudden you've cut that time in half, and now they can get through a lot more braces. How do orthodontists make money? By correcting teeth, right? And putting on braces. So, it's salespeople that came up with, this need that this is taking this amount of time, and then they went to the research and development and they developed light cure, which allowed them to do it far, far faster. Sales is the most important job in any organization, and I used to get a chuckle every year when I was in industry. The president of our company, who had been an accountant, every year at our company Christmas party, it was so demoralizing, would say, I just want to thank the accounting department for keeping the wheels on. And the rest of us were like, does accounting generate revenue? And the answer to that question is overwhelmingly no. Who generates revenue? Sales, right? Sales keeps the wheels on. So it's arguably the most important job in any organization. If you're not selling, you're not creating revenue, and you're not gonna be in business for very long. So what salespeople do is they identify potential customers and needs. They determine how to satisfy those needs, and then they provide customers with the information about products and services that will help satisfy those needs. Compensation for salespeople is generally higher because of their value, and I think I mentioned this earlier today, but if I didn't, redundancy is good. If I did, redundancy is good. If I didn't, I'll tell you now. Most of our sales students, about 80% of our sales graduates, make over $100,000 in their first year. And that's very, very standard. So compensation is generally a lot higher. It's the only career that you can go into and you can say what you want your salary to be, in essence. If you want to make more money, one of my friends, Adam, who works for US Foods, he said, I wanted to take my kids and my family to Disneyland. I figured out what a Disney vacation was going to cost. And I figured I had to sell $1,000 more each week of product in order to make that happen. So he sold $1,000 more product each week, and he took his family to Disneyland. He figured out, and, most professions, you don't get to do that. You're paid a salary, and you just are stuck at whatever the level of compensation is that you negotiate, right? And usually, the way you get a pay raise anymore is by going to work somewhere else. But that's not true in sales. So sales is a critical function in a market economy. Without salespeople, we don't have a great market economy. So what is required for success in sales? And this is where I will ask the question, the first critical thinking challenge for today. Are salespeople made or are they born? Are salespeople born or are they made? And by that, I mean, do we teach people how to be sales or are they naturally sort of gifted in sales? This is a question in a lot of areas. So I've written a textbook on leadership. It was published by Pearson, and my textbook is one of the few that my co-authors and I, when we debated this, we decided just to not address the issue because we had a fundamental disagreement among two of us felt one way and one of us felt another way. Think about in leadership, are leaders born or are they made? And almost every single textbook in leadership says that anyone can be a leader. And I fundamentally disagree with that. So salespeople are made, they need training. However, some people might have raw salesmanship skills, okay? Ms. Gillespie says, I think you can be taught, but there are people that are born with the skills and those people will do better in sales. Any other ideas?
I think that a lot of the time it comes naturally for a lot of people, and I think the skills can be further developed. You see it a lot of times, like kids, like some kids, like people are drawn to them, like in elementary school at a young age, kids are just drawn to them. So I think those skills just get developed as you get older, and they just naturally, subconsciously become sales skills because you're so good with people.
Okay, so again, this is similar to the argument in leadership. Can anybody be a leader? And in all of the leadership textbooks except ours, they all argue that anybody can be a leader. And I just don't think that's true. If you look at, there's a book called Accidental Presidents, and it's basically a book of all of the people who became president in an accidental way, right? So there are a number of these. Most of these accidental presidents became president because the president died. One accidental president became president because Richard Nixon resigned from office as a result of the Watergate scandal, right? And if you look at that, so Chung Lu says, I think it's both. Salespeople can be taught to maximize their talent in sales. I think that we're getting a consensus here that like you said, there are students that are, if you think about back to childhood, there were sort of kids that were naturally attractive and sort of took on leadership roles at a very early age. And I think that those skills can be developed. So if you look at the accidental presidents, one of them is ranked by historians as near great. A lot of them are ranked as complete and utter failures. So the one that's ranked as near great is Harry Truman. Truman becomes FDR's vice president. He's not FDR's first vice president. He's his vice president in his fourth term, right? And he didn't expect FDR to die. I don't know why he didn't expect FDR to die. I mean, the guy was not in good health. He was old. He had lived through managing a war. Actually, we were still in World War II when he died. And he really, at that point in time, the vice presidency was not the powerful institution that it has become under some modern presidents. There's nothing in the Constitution that really defines the role of the vice president, other than it says that he shall act as the president of the Senate, right? That's all. That's the only thing it says. Historically, what the vice president's role has been to wake up every morning and say, how's the president? And if everybody says the president's fine, well, you can go back to bed, right? Truman really rises to the occasion. And he was not taken into FDR's inner circle. FDR didn't really choose him. The party chose him for FDR. They pressured him into choosing Truman. And Truman really rises to the occasion. Andrew Johnson, on the other hand, is an accidental president. He was Lincoln's vice president. Lincoln is, of course, shot by John Wilkes Booth in the Ford Theater, and he was an utter failure. I mean, he was temperamentally not suited to leadership. He was mercurial. He was paranoid. I mean, he just was not a great leader. He was thrust into leadership role, and he did not rise to the challenge. Now, can you take somebody who is sort of like you suggested, a kid who's attractive, to other kids, who's sort of a natural born, charismatic person, and can you make them a better leader? I think you can do that, right? As much as I love our sales program, and every sales textbook says the same thing, that salespeople are made, they're not born. I can tell you that if somebody just is horribly shy, if they are afraid to talk to other people, if they are agoraphobic, that's a fear of the external world, I don't think there's much I can do to help them, right? But I can take people that sort of are naturally, fundamentally relationship focused, and I can make you better, right? I can make you a lot better. So I think what our consensus is that there are people, and it's a continuum, right? There's this extreme over here where there's somebody who is, as I said, agoraphobic, which is just a fear of going outside and a fear of the external world. If you've seen a movie called As Good as It Gets, the character that's played by Jack Nicholson in that, he's a writer, and he's agoraphobic. He doesn't like to go out, right? He doesn't like to get out of his apartment. But he's sort of forced to, and he becomes a better person by the end of the movie. But if you've got that kind of person over here, and then you've got somebody who is extraordinarily extroverted on the other end, right? And then there's a whole lot in the middle. And I think, particularly with those people that are in the middle, we can really improve, right? You can take anybody and make them a little bit better, but you can really, with those people in the middle, really, really improve them. So it's, what are the necessary requirements? Personal integrity, ethical standards. We know from studies that salespeople who are honest, and Benjamin Franklin was fond of this saying, honesty is the best policy. And I think when we talked about this before, I mentioned this, we always focus on the word honesty in that statement. Franklin put the emphasis on policy. It pays good dividends to be honest, right? And so I think high ethical standards in terms of relationship building are necessary. The personality structure, you have to have a positive self-image, and you have to have perseverance. You have to not be afraid. If you're horribly afraid of being told no, you may not make a good salesperson, right? So good personality, positive self-image, and perseverance. You have to have the ability to cultivate and maintain relationships. When I was growing up, there was an old adage that said, never mix business with pleasure. That's not really true. We want to keep customers. It's easier to keep a customer. Customers have something called lifetime value than it is to prospect for new customers. That's hard. There's a Cadillac dealership in Dallas called Sewell, and you will see Sewell Cadillacs in the Oklahoma City area because they have such a good reputation. In fact, my mother owns a Sewell Cadillac, and Mr. Sewell had wrote a book called The $325,000 Customer. And what he says in that book, at that time, it was written a long time ago, is that the average Cadillac customer will spend in their lifetime $325,000 on buying Cadillacs. And that's when Cadillacs were much less than they are today because the dollar was worth more, right? We've had inflation. You can easily spend on a Cadillac Escalade, I think they easily go over $100,000 if you get all of the bells and whistles on them. So if you're a Cadillac Escalade buyer, you're going to spend a lot more than $325,000. But at the time he wrote the book, it was $325,000. He said if you compound that with if you provide good service, they will tell other people about you, and they're actually worth $1.5 million. Through their positive word of mouth, they're worth $1.5 million. And that's even more true today. So you'll see Sewell Cadillacs as you're driving around, even in Oklahoma, because they have such a good reputation. You have to have a certain level of intellectual ability to be good at sales, and you have to have some empathy. You have to be able to empathize with people. It's one of the critical things in order to understand or feel where people or your customers are coming from. Right? So those are the things that are required for success. So the basics of professional sales, and we break this down, we talk about each of these in my professional selling class, and then we work on improving these skills. Identifying needs, prospecting. Now, every sales textbook will tell you, and this is a test question, every sales textbook will tell you that the most difficult part of sales is hearing no. You have to be pretty thick-skinned, and you have to get used to hearing no. I will disagree with that statement to some extent. I think psychologically, hearing no is one of the most difficult things, but because most salespeople and people who are really good at sales are slightly or greatly extroverted, right? They have a tendency to like people. I actually think from a time perspective that prospecting is one of the most difficult challenges for most salespeople. Most salespeople want to be talking to customers. They like talking to customers. Prospecting is a lonely task, but it is one of the most critical aspects of sales. Prospecting involves identifying anybody's a lead, right? Anybody can be a lead, but then qualifying that lead so that you have a qualified prospect, which is somebody who not only wants your product, but has the ability to pay for it and is the decision maker, right? I may want a new copy machine for UCO's College of Business, and I may have a need. The copy machine may be broken, and I may think, we need a new copier today because I've got tests that I've got to make, but I don't have the ability to pay for it. And even if I had the money to pay for it, I'm not the decision, out of my own personal finances, I'm not the decision maker for the College of Business, right? That goes through the dean's office and purchasing and bids and things like that. So finding a qualified prospect is challenging. One of the things that I'll do for next week is I will put a video up, because one of the things that I think will help you the most in planning your career is learning about social styles. So that's what we'll do for class next week. I'll put up my lectures on social styles for you to watch, and there will be test questions based on those lectures. But social styles will help you recognize people and how to communicate with them once you qualify that prospect. So identifying and recognizing who are good prospects. If you're going to sell to UCO, if you're going to sell anything over $5,000 to UCO, which copiers cost far more than $5,000, the one down the hall is probably a $100,000 machine. Who are the only people that can sign a contract for that amount of money? The vice president for administration and the president, right? So those are the ultimate decision makers. So figuring that out is vitally important, and that can be a challenging aspect. Trying to identify who it is and understanding the purchasing cycle can be difficult, particularly in business-to-business sales, which is what we train most people for. So then assisting, once you've identified a customer that's a qualified lead, assisting them in recognizing and defining their needs through questioning, getting them to tell you what it is that they need. Then providing solutions based on those needs, and then persuading them to make a decision about your product or service. The advantages of a sales career. Independence. If you are somebody who does not like to be micromanaged, and most of our sales students want to go into outside sales. They want to have a territory, and they want to go to work for people like Henry Schein, which provides dental and vet products and services. We've had, I think, 4 or 5 students recently that have gone to Henry Schein. We've got students that have gone to Paycom. It's about going out and meeting people. It's not a career where you have a boss that is usually standing there, unless you're doing inside sales, and most of our students don't want to do that. Most of our students want to go into outside sales. Your boss, you may have a territory For example, my friend Anita, who sold Light Cure for 3M, her territory was all of Kansas, Oklahoma, Western Arkansas, and North Texas. And her boss was in New York City, right? So, I mean, you don't have daily contact with your boss. They're not standing there watching over your shoulder and micromanaging you. Now, that can be a challenge because you can, decide that you would rather go play golf today, but if you do that, what are you gonna have to do to make it up, tomorrow? So you have to have a lot of discipline, but it allows for a lot of independence. There's a great deal of variance in customers' needs, particularly when you're dealing with business-to-business products. So when we were dealing with school districts, for example, when I was at the American Education Corporation, we have all kinds of different districts, right, that have various challenges and needs. Everything from Edmond Public Schools, which is a highly technologically sophisticated district, to districts where they were still, at the time that I worked for the American Education Corporation, not necessarily fully online. So we had to have our product available to be put on individual machines or on a LAN, a local area network, or a wide area network. To Edmond, which could use a web-based version of our product, right? D2L is a web-based version of a learning management system. So you have all of these different school districts. Not only do you have challenges in terms of what they need in terms of their technical capabilities, but you also have challenges in terms of what they need in terms of content, right? Edmond schools, the content areas that they really wanted from us were a lot of more sophisticated and higher level courses and elective courses. That's what they wanted. Whereas if we were selling to Broken Bow, which is in the southeastern part of the state, they were much more focused on getting their kids up to the level that they could pass the standardized tests, which are used to determine how much money school districts get. If they're failing school districts, they can have some of their money taken away and given to private organizations that are then supposed to help bring students up to level. So there's a lot of variance in customers' needs, and figuring that out, particularly in the business-to-business context, is challenging, and it's interesting. There's lots of opportunities for advancement. This is my second critical thinking question of the day. Why is it that a lot of salespeople don't actually want to advance? Because sales provides the financial revenue to keep a business going. Obviously, it's critical, and there's lots of opportunities for you to advance to the C-level, to the C-suite, but a lot of salespeople actually don't want to advance. Why is that?
It seems all of it has to do with that, person-to-person communication. They're like, same reason why they don't want to necessarily work on within the force selling.
Okay, that's part of it. Yeah, they when you like dealing with people and you like dealing with variety, if you go into management, all of a sudden you're not dealing with those people. If that's what you like, you're not necessarily dealing with that. You're dealing with a more limited set of people. Why else might salespeople? Ms. Gillespie says commission pay, and that is absolutely it. So on every survey that's done of people in professions across a variety of professions, pay is actually not one. When they advance, Mr. Morrison says when they advance, they aren't paid commission and actually make less money with the promotion. That is absolutely true. Usually the pay structure for salespeople is, in most of our business-to-business sales, it's a base pay, which is usually $30,000 to $50,000 a year, plus commissions. When you go into sales management, it becomes almost all base pay. So the base pay is a lot higher. The base rate for sales managers, our VPs at the American Education Corporation, their base pay was something like $175,000, but they had a very small variable compensation structure, right? Their salespeople actually made a lot more money than they did. But of course, the disadvantage of that is that because it is more variable, if you have something like a recession and all of a sudden you're not selling as much, your pay can also decrease. But most salespeople really are motivated by money. In every, what I was saying before, in every study of most professions, lawyers, doctors, engineers, computer, tech support people, things like that, pay is rated as usually like 7 to 10 on their motivation for work. Most people say they're motivated by, creative processes or, getting to socialize. Their identity is wrapped up in their job until you get to salespeople. And when you get to salespeople, money is a bigger motivator. It climbs higher on the list to 1 or 2 for salespeople. And so if you go into management, a lot of times that variable compensation structure is much more limited. And so most sales managers make less money than their sales professionals. Sales is a great way to develop entrepreneurship skills. A lot of our students say that they want to be entrepreneurs. Obviously, a degree in sales will help you because if you're not selling, you don't have a business to be an entrepreneur, right? So it's a great way to develop those entrepreneurship skills. Disadvantages. Salary or commission can be a big advantage. If you're not real good at it, it's a big disadvantage, right? Because you're probably it's very easy. Salespeople's jobs are far more easy to quantify than other positions. Let's suppose you get a degree, much to my horror and dismay, I can't talk you out of getting that accounting degree. And you become an accountant and you become, a controller at a company. It's really hard to say, that's really creative accounting. Creative accounting usually leads to going to prison, right? I mean, you don't generally want creative accounting. There is a joke, my accounting joke, I'll tell you. Man is looking, he's a wealthy businessman and he's looking for a new accountant. His accountant died. So he goes into an accountant's office and he says, I'm looking to hire a new accountant. I've got this business that's worth about $50 million. We take in, 25 to $30 million in revenue a year. And I have one question to ask you before I hire you. And the accountant says, well, sure, sir, what is it? And he says, what's 2 plus 2? And the accountant says, it's 4. The man gets up and he leaves the accountant's office. He goes down the street to another accounting firm. He walks in and he says, gives him a spiel. I'm worth this amount of money. I got this business. But before I hire you, I have one question for you. And the accountant says, well, sure, sir. What is it? He says, what's 2 plus 2? And the accountant says, 4. And the guy gets up and leaves. Goes to the third accountant's office. Gives him a spiel. Says, I have one question for you. And he says, well, what is it, sir? And he says, what's 2 plus 2? The accountant gets up from his desk, he walks over, he pulls the shades, he closes the door, he looks at the guy to make sure he's not, carrying a wire, and he says, what do you want it to be? Right? That's generally, what do you want it to be results in income tax evasion charges. Al Capone killed literally hundreds of people. What did they get him on?
Tax evasion?
Tax evasion, yeah, right? I mean, income tax evasion. So, it's hard to really get creative as a controller. It's hard to tell, if they're doing just a super duper job or a mediocre job, because pretty much the math, 2 plus 2 should equal 4. Whereas in sales, it's much more easy to quantify that. You either meet your sales goals and exceed them, or you don't. And if you don't, you're probably not going to have a job for very long. Another disadvantage is it can require irregular hours. If you're like my friend Anita, who sold dental products for 3M and then for Henry Schein as well, she had to travel a lot, right? I mean, if your territory is all of Kansas, Oklahoma, Western Arkansas, and Northern Texas, that's a whole lot, and her company provided her obviously with a company car, that's a whole lot of driving. And it's not flying, right? I mean, if your territory were Oklahoma City and Dallas, you could fly, you can get on a commercial airline and fly down there. But when you're covering Kansas, where's the major airport in Kansas? Well, there's not very many, right? There's Wichita has a major airport, Topeka, Kansas City, right? I mean, that's Kansas City, Kansas, although the airport's on the Missouri side. So you're driving a whole lot, which means that you're away from home. It means irregular hours. If you don't like to travel, sales may not be the career path for you. And then, of course, handling rejections can be psychologically difficult. Difficult part of the sales process. So, and these are not mutually exclusive categories. You can have overlapping categories. We can classify sales jobs in a number of ways. So trade selling, usually dealing with buyers who are resellers. So this is like going to Dallas Market. So you go to market if you're a retailer, and you go to the Dallas Market and you meet people who are wholesalers or producers of goods that you are going to buy for your retail store. Missionary sales. This is what a lot of our students actually go into, is missionary sales. We have a whole lot of students that want to go into pharmaceutical sales. Why? It's an interesting field. It allows for a lot of travel usually, but they're not directly selling a one-for-one, right? They're attempting to get people to buy their drug. So Pfizer has come out with a COVID vaccine that is in phase 3 trials. There's another company, I think Moderna has also come up with a drug that's in phase 3 trials. Both of those drugs are very promising, and they show that they're 90% effective according to their statistics, right? So Pfizer, and there's another company that's come out with one that's also now in phase 3 trials. It's only 70% effective. If I read the story correctly, I believe it's 70% effective. The advantage of that is the Pfizer drug and the Moderna, I think it's Moderna, I may be wrong, but I know Pfizer's one, and I think it's Moderna. Those vaccines both require that the drug be kept in extremely cold storage until it's used. And once it's brought out of cold storage, it only lasts for a very short period of time. So you have to either start giving it, or you're having to dispose of it fairly quickly, because the shelf life, once it's taken out of cold storage, is very minimal, right? So let's suppose you're a Pfizer rep. You've got this great drug. It's 90% effective. You're going to go out and you're going to have to try and convince doctors as a missionary salesperson to basically adopt that drug. So you're not selling it directly. You're getting doctors to basically prescribe that drug over your competitor's drug. The advantage of the one that's only 70% effective is that it doesn't require, if I recall correctly, it doesn't require the level of cold storage that the other two require. And the other two are such that the cold storage requirements are so stringent that I believe I read on the Pfizer drug, they could only open the freezer like twice a day, and it had to be so many hours apart in order to maintain the level of cold storage, right? So you're going out and you're trying to convince doctors basically to write script, if you were selling for Pfizer or GlaxoSmithKline or something like that, to people who will ultimately use it, go to their pharmacies and purchase it, or purchase it from their doctors. Technical sales, a lot of times technical and missionary, a lot of times will overlap, because you have to have a lot of technical knowledge. If you're a drug rep, you have to know what the drug does and how it works, because doctors are going to ask you, and what the side effects of that drug are, right? So that's also technical sales, so people with specialized skills. A lot of our salespeople, when I worked for the American Education Corporation, were former teachers. They were people who, had a passion for education. They loved being classroom teachers, but they decided that they could make more money in sales, and it was a nice industry. So they could go in and they could talk to teachers about how our LMS worked, right? They understood the technical part of it, but they also understood how teachers use products and how they're going to view things. They could talk to principals and have some idea of what their needs are. So technical salespeople specialize skills like the chemical industry, specialized machine or high tech. My brother, he's a tax attorney, but he's also really for Goldman Sachs, he's one of their top salespeople. They send him out on what they call marketing meetings. You have to be worth, in order to be a client of my brother or the division of Goldman that he heads, you have to be worth $50 million. That's the base. Anyone less than $50 million, they won't take you on as a client. Obviously, those people have highly specialized needs, and he's really good at going in and being able to provide them very quickly with an analysis of their financial situation and how Goldman and their family office can help them. And not just in terms of their taxes, but also in terms of investment vehicles and insurance products and things like that. New business development. This is vital for firms that are seeking growth. I think I told you when we talked about product development, they estimate, scholars who talk about new product development estimate that most businesses need to be constantly coming up with, they need to have between 25 and 50 products in the pipeline at any given time. Then there's simple order taking. This is usually inside sales. You call into Geico when you need car insurance, and you talk to a representative, and that's a much simpler form of sales. And then order getting, which involves creative problem solving, going out and actually getting orders and prospecting. And again, those could overlap. Relationships. So what we focus on is not that traditional model of sales. We focus on, in our program, relationship selling. So we think relationships are the heart of selling. Online sales are increasing, and that's a huge trend. And how do you build those relationships in an online environment? Particularly in an age of COVID, we have seen a lot of people have to develop skills and understand how to negotiate in online settings. And so that's something that's obviously increasing. Online sales have increased 100% over the last few years. Technical and advanced sales positions are growing. So those positions that sell things like sophisticated financial products and services, accounting, legal, those are a growing field in relationship selling. And then new selling, which is about value co-creation, understanding your client. So I'm going to go back to my example because I'm fascinated by copiers, right? I think I told you all this before. My mother had a copier in her real estate company in the 1980s. And at that time, Xerox was the largest, they had the vast majority of the market share in the copier industry. And it was pretty basic. You had to lift up the lid, you put the piece of paper down, you hit the button, or you put in how many copies you wanted, you hit the button, and then it spit out the copies. And that was a sophisticated piece of machinery at the time, because in most schools at that time, and this is something that you all have never ever experienced, they didn't use copiers for classrooms, particularly in primary and secondary education. Copiers were very expensive. They were limited. Usually schools had one copier. It was in the principal's office, and it was not to be used for just everyday use. So they needed, of course, to make copies for students. And the way they did that was with something called a ditto machine. And you all have never seen this. And the way ditto machines worked, where you had a special template paper that you would make out your worksheet for your students on, and then you would put it on this drum, and the ditto machine had what was called ditto fluid. And I was a teacher's aide, and I used to love making dittos because it had this sort of sweet smell to it, and the copies had this sweet smell to them as well. So you'd put this ditto template on this drum, the machine had ditto fluid in it, and then you would turn it with a crank. And then more sophisticated ditto machines, they were electric, and they would turn it for themselves, and it would produce dittos, ditto copies. And so that's the way we had worksheets when I was in elementary and junior high school, because copy machines were really expensive. Well, copy machines now have all of these different features, right? So the copy machine that's down the hall can fax, it can scan and send things to your email, it can collate, it can staple, it's got a feeder tray. You can send copies from your desktop to the copy machine and have it, collated, stapled, and hole punched. You can have it duplexed. That was something that for the copiers in the 1980s didn't do, duplexing, where you can have it printed on both sides to save paper, right? All of these features. That means that there's a whole lot more moving and working parts in these modern copiers than there was in my mother's real estate office in the 1980s, right? And there's a lot more potential for things like jams in the finisher of the copier. And so you generally buy a service package with copiers, and that gets you so many calls in every month, right? So maybe you get 5 free calls. After that, they start charging you. So part of value co-creation in this example, if you're a copier salesman, is sort of figuring out, well, how many calls, so they divide the packages on service for the copier up into various levels. And for this purpose, I don't know what they call them for the current copier, but sort of, let's say, platinum, gold, silver, and bronze, right? With a bronze package, maybe you get 2 calls out a month. And with a silver package, you get 5 calls out a month. And with the gold, you get 10. And with a platinum, let's say you get unlimited calls out a month. Well, you're paying a whole lot for the service contract. It's a big part of the sale, right? And you don't want to have excess usage, right? If you're a business that doesn't make a whole lot of copies, and this is happening at UCO, I didn't make copies of my syllabus, for example. I stopped making copies of my syllabi several years ago. I just put it up on D2L. I tell students it's on D2L, and you can either go make a copy yourself, or you can just look it up on D2L, right? That has cut down a whole lot of our printing needs. Most of my colleagues are doing the same thing. They're not printing out hard copies of syllabus and passing them out. They're just referring students to D2L, where you can get the syllabus, because if I give you a copy of it, what are you going to do? You're going to shove it in your backpack or your purse or something like that. You're probably going to lose it, and then you're going to go back to D2L and look it up, right? Because it's there. So let's cut out a whole lot of copy needs. That means that we're using the copier less. In COVID, the copy machine has been used even less, because all of the tests that we used to run off for classes like this one are now what? Online. So we have a whole lot of people over, for example, in the history department, who maybe have never done an online test, who all of a sudden are now doing online tests because they've been forced to. The university said, this is how you're going to have to do things, because we've got these extended class sections, and so you're going to have to do that. That means the usage of the copiers has gone down, and it may continue to go down as those people who, in history, I can tell you, I still have colleagues that I go over to that college because my co-authors are in the College of Liberal Arts on my textbook, and we're working on the 3rd edition of the textbook now. And I'll walk past, history professors who are still using an overhead projector with these transparencies that they made like 50 years ago. I really think that it'd be nice to be a history professor and not have to worry about, broadcasting on YouTube and learning all of this stuff, because I just have to sort of keep up with it, even as just a marketer, right? And understanding these sorts of trends that, we know who won the Civil War. And if you're teaching American history from, the Civil War to present, there's not a whole lot that's changing there. Or if you teach, from 1776 to the Civil War, there's really not a whole lot changing there. And so now we've got these people that have now had to learn this skill, and they're putting this stuff up on D2L, and maybe in the future, they'll do that. One of the things that's nice about putting exams up on D2L is I don't have to take a class period to do exams anymore if I don't want to, right? So the whole point of this is that as the usage of those copiers decreases, the chances of it breaking down are diminished. So a good salesperson will say, look, you know, last year, when we renewed your service contract, you bought the platinum, and you're only having calls out now twice a month. Maybe you need to drop down in levels. And although that seems like that would be counterintuitive, that you're not upselling, it will ultimately benefit you to build that value co-creation and keep people happy so that they're not using excess capacity. Right? So it's about working with your clients to understand their needs. So relationship selling versus traditional selling. The traditional selling model is why most people say they don't want a career in sales. So when we talk to students, one of the things that we have a hard time doing is a lot of students say, I want to get a business degree, or my parents said, I'm going to get a business degree. My undergraduate degree was not in business. My undergraduate degree was in political science, a most worthless degree. What's the only thing you can do with a degree in political science? Go to law school, right? That's why I got it, because it's the most recommended degree program for people who want to go to law school, because you take a lot of law courses in your undergraduate, you understand about government, and you can go to law school, right? So your parents or you are brighter than I was, and you said, I want to get a business degree. But a lot of students tell us, when we talk to them about professional sales, I don't want to do sales. I want to get a degree in finance. And they don't realize that ultimately, in finance, what are you going to be doing? My brother didn't think when he got a tax degree, when he became a tax attorney, that he would be selling, but that's what he does. He sells. That's the biggest, 50% of his job is now in bringing in new clients to Goldman Sachs and selling, right? So if you're going to go be a financial advisor, you're going to have to sell people. But people say, I don't want to sell. I want to get a business degree, but I don't want to get a degree in sales. Not realizing that most people, their first job out of college, even if they get degrees in the liberal arts, they're probably going to be in a sales role, right? I mean, an overwhelming number of people have sales. But this older model, this traditional model, which is the sales philosophy, which started at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and ran to about 1960, is the model. It's the AIDA model: awareness, interest, desire, action, right? So you spend 10% of your time getting a pitch. And there are still people who do this. There's a guy, I love to go to the state fair, horribly disappointed that we didn't have a state fair. There's a guy that's at the state fair every year, and he is really slick. And every year he sells something different. I mean, he's people don't recognize him, I guess, but every year he's got a different gimmick. The first year I saw him about 15 years ago, he was selling the ShamWow at the fair, and then he was selling these washcloths that are made out of bamboo fiber that are supposed to be antimicrobial, and I mean, he's gone through a whole lot of stuff. 2 years ago, he was selling these riding ponies for kids. So and it was like, and it will hold an adult. And he was on the pony, and it's kind of a motorized, and he's bouncing up and down on the pony, and he's got this this boom mic attached to a headset and a little speaker, and he's making a pitch, getting your interest, qualifying you, like, can you afford payments of $5.95 for the rest of your life on the little pony? Then showing some features, and then closing long and hard. You spend 40% of your time closing, right? The deal. That's the model of sales that leads to bad feelings about salespeople, because we've all experienced this when we go to the car lot. That's a high pressure sales, overcoming objections and getting you to close, right? The relationship model that we now focus on is you spend most of your time, 40% of your time, on qualifying prospects, doing that pre-poach planning, and then building trust and rapport with those people. If you spend more time at the top, at the beginning, so we have an inverted pyramid as opposed to a right-sided pyramid, closing becomes easier, and you don't have to spend that much time on it. Then you're going to spend, 30% of your time, so 70% of your time is in these first two phases of building rapport, developing a relationship, identifying the prospect's needs, what it is that they want, why you can help them, asking questions and listening, whereas you don't do a whole lot of that in the traditional model. Then showing the prospect your presentation, why it is that you can help them, what kinds of solutions you have, and then only 10% of your time is spent in reassuring and closing. The vast majority of your time is spent in this relationship building cycle. And most of your time will be spent after the sale, if you want to keep customers and have that customer lifetime value, in continuing to build that relationship, right? So that older sales philosophy is something that we attempt to avoid, although you still see a lot of people using that, and particularly it's still used in business to consumer, B2C sales, and things like cars. Bob Mills has come out with a whole new campaign forever and ever. When I was a kid growing up, and I would watch Bob Mills commercials, his slogan was Bob Mills, the working man's friend. He's now given that up, and his new commercial is basically, he's the antithesis of Mathis Brothers, right? No shoppers, stalkers. So we've all had this experience at Mathis Brothers where you walk in and you like try to avoid making eye contact with any of the sales associates, right? So that's the traditional model of sales. And it's still used, but it's generally one that we try to avoid in our sales program. So the relationship cycle, identifying qualified prospects. I may have a need for a copier. I may want the copier. I may even have the ability, if I had a lot of money on hand, to buy the copier myself. But again, I can't buy copiers for UCF, right? Who can buy copiers for UCF? Well, you're going to have to figure out who has the ability to initiate the purchasing process, which would be the dean's office at the college level, and then they go through the purchasing department, and then ultimately the president has to sign on any contract that's over $5,000. So planning your pre-approach activities. And so what I'm going to do for next week is I'm going to post the video on social styles, because this is a big part of the pre-approach activities. And I have students in my sales class do a critical thinking challenge, usually in groups. In the past, before we had COVID, I would have them do this in groups. So I would take whatever is our major sponsor for our sales program that year. This year it's Love's. And I would say, okay, most of you think, now why does Love's need salespeople? Because you think Love's is just a convenience store and gas station that you probably stop at as you're traveling through Oklahoma. But Love's is more than that. They have a commercial division which focuses on tractor trailer companies. And in particular, one of their products is a financial services product called factoring. And what they do is they will buy accounts receivable from small trucking companies. They will give them instant cash, and then of course they are responsible for collecting on that account receivable, and they take a percentage, right? So they take, I think, 2 or 3% of the account receivable. So they pay you 97% of the receivable. They collect on it, and you get cash instantly. Why is this attractive? So I have a cousin by marriage who owns a small trucking company. He has 6 trucks. He leases all of them to OTL, which is now called UPT. I think OTL has been bought or merged, and it's now UPT. What he does is they're paid by the mile, right? So you're paid for each unit that you have out working, you're paid by the mile. So he turns in invoices to UPT, and then they pay on a net 30-day cycle. But it can actually be longer than 30 days, because if you submit the invoice after their deadline, so let's suppose that their deadline is the 1st of the month. Well, he's trucking all throughout the month for UPT and turning in invoices to them. So if you turn in an invoice on, say, the 15th of the month, and their deadline is the 1st, you've missed that deadline, so you're actually gonna be out probably a net 45 days, right? Depending on the month, because some months have 30, some months have 31, and one month has 28, except in leap years when it has 29, right? So you're gonna be out 40 days on that invoice. Well, if you need to buy fuel and tires and things like that for your truck, you may need money now. This is similar to, you've probably seen the commercials for J.G. Wentworth, where it's, if you have an annuity, but you need cash now, call it J.G. Wentworth, horrible singer, but you know, if you have an annuity or a structured settlement where they're paying you, you can sell that annuity or part of it or part of your structured settlement to J.G. Wentworth and they'll give you cash now. That's the same thing as factoring, but it's for trucks, right? If you have an invoice, if you have an accounts receivable, they will pay you for that, take a percent, and you get the commission. So I'll say things like to my class, I want you to find a small trucking company of 10 trucks or less, and it's easy to do with Loves because most people don't have a cousin who has a trucking company. Figure out who the owner is, what their needs are, and what their likely social style is. So there are 4 social styles, and in the video that I'll post for next week, you'll see this. There's analytical, there's amiable, there's driver, analytical, amiable, driver, and what's the 4th one? Drawing a blank. Expressive, right? So expressives are your theatrical types. Your amiables are just nice. They're the easiest to sell to. The hardest to sell to are your drivers and your analyticals, right? Because drivers think they know what they want. They're very sure of themselves. They're very confident, and they want just the facts. You know, just give me the facts. Analyticals are hard to sell to because they will get what's called analysis paralysis. So I have them do this thing where they identify what the likely needs are, who the decision maker is, and then what their likely social style is based on available public data from things like LinkedIn or Facebook or their websites, things like that. Then in phase 2, you approach the prospect, you build rapport, get to know them, do the discovery of needs, present, and then handle objections and gain commitment. That's where I stopped in my first class. We're about out of time, so I will stop there. You two will come up and see me. If you texted, I will update those as well right after class. I hope everybody has a safe Thanksgiving. It's going to be odd. Normally I have like 35 people between my family and other friends that they bring to my house. And this year, obviously, because of COVID, we're down to my mother and I, so it's going to be very odd. But I hope that you all have a fantastic Thanksgiving. And for next week, I will post the rest of a lecture that contains this information and then the information on social styles, which will be on the final exam. So I will not see you all again. I'm very sad by that. It's a very odd semester, but I hope you all have a fantastic Thanksgiving. You're welcome to text me if you have questions, and I will post those videos probably today for the week after Thanksgiving. Thanks. I hope you guys have a great Thanksgiving. Enjoy your break. Be safe out there. Don't eat too much turkey. Let me close this. Let me stop the live feed. Bye. Thank you all for those that joined on YouTube.